Olivia Carlisle adjusted the strap of her worn messenger bag as she navigated through the crowded campus flea market, the October morning air sharp against her face. At 24, she had learned to move through the world with a particular kind of efficiency born from necessity. Every minute counted when you were juggling 3 part-time jobs and a graduate program in neuroscience. Her dark hair, streaked with the kind of premature silver that came from too many 18-hour days, was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes spoke of someone who spent more money on textbooks than fashion. The flea market sprawled across the university quad like a temporary city of desperate commerce. Students hawked everything from outdated electronics to furniture salvaged from dorm room purges. Olivia's keen eyes swept over the tables, searching for anything that might be useful for her research on memory formation and temporal consciousness. Her thesis advisor had made it clear that the department's equipment budget was stretched thin, and if she wanted access to cutting-edge technology, she'd have to find creative solutions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when she saw him. The man stood behind a folding table covered with an eclectic array of electronics, old smartphones, tangled cables, and devices that looked like they belonged in a museum of failed innovations. But it wasn't his merchandise that caught Olivia's attention. It was his behavior. He kept glancing toward the tree line that bordered the quad, his weathered fingers drumming nervously against the metal table edge. His salt and pepper beard was unkempt, and his clothes hung loose on a frame that suggested recent weight loss. Everything about him screamed of a man running from something. "Excuse me," Olivia said, approaching his table. "Are any of these functional?" The man's pale blue eyes darted to her face, then away. "Most of it, yeah. Depends what you're looking for." His voice carried a slight tremor, as if he were fighting to keep it steady. Olivia's gaze fell on what appeared to be a VR headset. Though unlike any consumer model she'd ever seen, the device was sleek black polymer with unusual ventilation patterns along the sides. And instead of the typical logo of a major manufacturer, it bore only a small etched symbol she didn't recognize. 3 interlocking circles that seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. "What about this one?" she asked, pointing to the headset. The man's reaction was immediate and unsettling. His hands stilled completely, and when he looked at the device, something that might have been fear flickered across his features. "That one's—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "That one's broken. Probably not worth your time." Olivia lifted the headset, surprised by its weight. The material felt warm to the touch, and she could see sophisticated circuitry through small gaps in the casing. This wasn't broken technology. This was something far more advanced than anything she'd encountered in her research. "How much?" "Look, miss, you really don't want that thing." The man's voice grew urgent. "Trust me on this. There are plenty of other options here that would serve you better," but Olivia's scientific curiosity was already fully engaged. She turned the device over in her hands, noting the unusual port configurations and what appeared to be some kind of neural interface adaptation. "I'm a graduate student in neuroscience. I work with brain-computer interfaces. This looks like experimental equipment." The man stared at her for a long moment, and Olivia could see some internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. $4, he said quietly. $4? Olivia's eyebrows shot up. "For a VR headset? Even if it's broken, the components alone are worth $4. Take it or leave it." The man's voice carried an edge of desperation now. He glanced again toward the tree line, his anxiety palpable. "I need it gone. Today, right now." Olivia studied his face more carefully. There was intelligence there and education. This wasn't some random student trying to offload junk. The careful way he described the device as broken rather than non-functional, the obvious quality of the equipment, and his desperate need to sell it all pointed to something much more complex than a simple flea market transaction. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Alan," he replied after a moment's hesitation. "Just Alan. Olivia pulled 4 crumpled dollar bills from her wallet, nearly the last of her spending money until her next paycheck from the campus library. Deal. The moment the money touched his palm, Alan's shoulders sagged with visible relief. But instead of the satisfaction of a successful sale, his expression held something that looked almost like regret. He pocketed the bills quickly and began gathering his remaining merchandise with hurried efficiency. "Alan," Olivia said as he prepared to leave, "whatever I find in this device, just remember where I got it." Alan froze, his hands stilling on a box of old cables. "What do you mean, whatever you find? You wouldn't sell something this advanced for $4 unless you either didn't know what it was or you knew exactly what it was and needed it gone." Olivia's voice was gentle but probing. "Your reaction tells me it's the latter." For a moment, Alan looked like he might say something more. His mouth opened, then closed, and Olivia could see him wrestling with some internal conflict. Finally, he straightened and met her eyes directly. "Time," he said quietly, "isn't what we think it is. Be careful how deep you look." Before Olivia could respond, Alan was walking away, his pace quickening with each step. Within minutes, he had disappeared entirely into the crowd of students and faculty, leaving Olivia standing alone with her $4 purchase and a growing sense that she had just stepped into something far more significant than a simple electronics transaction. The weight of the device in her hands felt different now, not just the physical mass of advanced technology, but the weight of possibility and danger that Alan's warning had carried. Olivia looked around the bustling flea market, watching her fellow students haggle over textbooks and coffee makers, and wondered how many of them realized that their understanding of reality might be about to change. As she made her way back toward her dormitory, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Every time she glanced back, she saw only the normal flow of campus life, but the sensation persisted. The device in her bag seemed to pulse with its own energy, and Olivia found herself walking faster, eager to reach the privacy of her room, where she could begin to unravel the mystery that Alan had thrust into her hands. The campus bells chimed noon as Olivia finally reached her destination, but she had the distinct impression that her perception of time was about to become much more complicated. Olivia's dorm room was a study in organized chaos. Her desk overflowed with neuroscience textbooks, research papers, and electronic components from various experiments. The walls were covered with brain scan printouts and temporal lobe diagrams that most students would find incomprehensible. Her roommate Zara's side of the room presented a stark contrast. Neat, organized, and decorated with law books and motivational posters about justice and advocacy. Zara Okafor looked up from her constitutional law reading as Olivia entered, her dark eyes immediately focusing on the strange device Olivia was extracting from her messenger bag. At 23, Zara had the kind of practical intelligence that made her an excellent pre-law student and an even better roommate for someone as scattered as Olivia. Her Nigerian-American background had instilled in her a healthy skepticism of anything that seemed too good to be true. "Please tell me you didn't spend money we don't have on more broken electronics," Zara said, watching Olivia carefully place the headset on her desk. $4, Olivia replied, already reaching for her toolkit. "And I don't think it's broken." Zara set down her book and moved closer, her expression growing concerned as she got a better look at the device. "Olivia, that doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. Where did you get it?" "Campus flea market. Some guy named Alan was practically giving it away." Olivia began examining the headset under her desk lamp, noting details she had missed in the outdoor lighting. The polymer casing showed no signs of wear, despite its obvious sophistication, and the etched symbol seemed even more intricate up close. 3 interlocking circles that created an optical illusion of depth. "And you think this was a good idea because—" Zara's voice carried the patient tone of someone who had grown accustomed to her roommate's impulsive research decisions. Olivia didn't answer immediately. She was too absorbed in what she was discovering. The port configurations were unlike anything in current consumer electronics. Instead of standard USB or proprietary connections, the device featured what appeared to be neural interface adaptations, connectors designed to interface directly with human bioelectric fields. The sophistication of the engineering was staggering. "Zara, look at this," Olivia said, her voice filled with growing excitement. "These aren't standard electronics components. This is biotech integration at a level that shouldn't exist outside of major research laboratories. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Zara leaned in for a closer look, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern. "Olivia, if this is experimental technology, it could be dangerous. We don't know what it does or where it came from." But Olivia was already powering up her laptop, running diagnostic software she had developed for her research on brain-computer interfaces. The headset responded to her wireless scans with data streams that made her breath catch. The device wasn't just sophisticated. It was actively processing information in ways that defied her understanding of current technology. "The power source alone is impossible," Olivia murmured, studying the readouts. "It's drawing energy from ambient electromagnetic fields. The processing power is off the charts. And these neural interface protocols," she trailed off, her scientific mind struggling to accept what she was seeing. "Olivia," Zara said firmly, "step away from the device." But it was too late. Olivia had already isolated the activation sequence, and her curiosity had overridden her caution. She carefully positioned the headset and activated the power sequence. The moment the device came online, Olivia's world changed. The familiar chaos of her dorm room dissolved, replaced by an interface that seemed to exist directly in her visual cortex. Streams of data flowed past her awareness, but not in any language or format she recognized. Instead, the information felt somehow organic, as if it were being translated directly into understanding rather than requiring interpretation. And then she saw them, her lost moments. The first fragment hit her with startling clarity. Herself, sitting in Professor Martinez's lecture on synaptic plasticity that morning, but not the version she remembered. In her memory, she had been taking notes, engaged with the material. But the fragment showed her zoned out, staring at her notebook while her pen moved randomly across the page, her consciousness seemingly elsewhere for nearly 7 minutes. The next fragment was even more unsettling. Olivia watched herself scrolling through her phone the previous evening, but the Olivia in the fragment wasn't making conscious choices about what to view. Her thumb moved automatically, her eyes tracked the screen, but some deeper part of her awareness was simply absent. 37 minutes had passed in what felt like seconds, and she had no memory of a single thing she had seen. But the most disturbing fragment came from just 2 hours earlier. Olivia watched herself walk into her shared kitchen, open the refrigerator, and stand there for nearly 3 minutes. She could see her own face in the reflection of the refrigerator's interior light, blank, vacant, as if the essential Olivia had simply stepped out of her body temporarily. When she finally closed the refrigerator and walked away, she could see the moment when awareness returned to her features, along with the familiar confusion of forgetting why she had come to the kitchen in the first place. The interface began displaying numerical data. Harvested duration, 47 minutes, 23 seconds. Source, local collection array. Status, processing. Olivia's scientific mind reeled as the implications hit her. The device wasn't just showing her lost time, it was collecting it. But from where and how? The fragments she was viewing weren't memories. They were too detailed, too complete. They were recordings of moments when her consciousness had somehow disconnected. A soft chime drew her attention to a new data stream. The device was showing her fragments from other people. Her doormate Sarah forgetting her words mid-sentence during a phone call. Professor Chen, staring blankly at his computer screen for 5 minutes during office hours. A stranger on the campus quad standing motionless while others walked around him. All of them experiencing the same temporary absence of conscious awareness that Olivia had thought was a normal part of human experience. But the most shocking revelation came when she noticed the transmission indicators. The harvested time wasn't just being collected, it was being sent somewhere. A steady stream of data flowed from the device to coordinates that meant nothing to her. But the volume of information was staggering. Whatever was receiving this data was accumulating vast amounts of human consciousness fragments from sources all over the area. "Olivia!" Zara's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Olivia, take that thing off right now!" Olivia became aware that she had been motionless for an extended period, just like the fragments she had been viewing. When she removed the headset, she found Zara standing over her with obvious concern, and the afternoon light streaming through their window told her that hours had passed when it felt like minutes. "How long was I?" Olivia began. 23 minutes, Zara said firmly. "You put that thing on and then just sat there like a statue." "I was about to call campus security." Olivia looked down at the device in her hands, noting that the display now showed harvested duration, 1 hour, 14 minutes, 52 seconds. The additional time had come from her own extended use of the device. It had been harvesting her consciousness, even as she used it to examine other harvested consciousness. "Zara," Olivia said slowly, "I think we need to be very careful about who we tell about this." "Tell them what? That you bought some kind of mind control device from a stranger for $4? Zara's voice was sharp with concern and growing anger. "Olivia, whatever that thing is, it's not safe. Look at yourself. You were completely unresponsive. What if I hadn't been here?" Olivia didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the device's display, watching the harvested time counter continue to climb, even though the device was now inactive. Somewhere in the background, it was still collecting lost moments from people in the vicinity, adding to its growing store of human consciousness fragments. The scientific implications were staggering, but the ethical implications were terrifying. If her analysis was correct, people all around campus, all around the world potentially, were having pieces of their consciousness harvested without their knowledge or consent. The lost moments that everyone experienced, the gaps in attention that were considered normal parts of human cognition, might actually be the result of systematic theft. As Olivia powered down the device and locked it in her desk drawer, she couldn't shake the feeling that her $4 purchase had just revealed a conspiracy that could change humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. But she also couldn't ignore Zara's concern, or the growing certainty that whatever forces were behind this technology would not be pleased to learn that their secret had been discovered. The familiar comfort of her dorm room suddenly felt fragile and temporary. Olivia had the distinct impression that her old life, the simple existence of a struggling graduate student, had just ended, and whatever came next would be infinitely more complex and dangerous. Olivia's obsession with the device began subtly, the way most addictions do. It started with just one more test to verify her initial observations, then progressed to systematic documentation of the phenomena she was witnessing. Within 3 days, her academic routine had completely disintegrated. She missed 2 neuroscience seminars, forgot to submit a research paper, and stopped showing up for her shifts at the campus library. Zara watched this transformation with growing alarm. She had lived with Olivia for 2 years and had never seen her roommate prioritize anything over her studies. Olivia was the kind of person who read research papers for entertainment and got excited about statistical analysis. But now she sat hunched over her desk for hours at a time, either examining the device or documenting her findings in notebooks that she hid whenever Zara came near. "Olivia, you missed Dr. Peterson's lecture on memory consolidation," Zara said on Thursday evening, finding Olivia exactly where she had left her that morning, sitting at her desk with the device's components spread out like a complex puzzle. The one you've been looking forward to for months. Olivia didn't look up from her work. She had been mapping the device's collection range using a modified version of her brain monitoring software, and the results were far more disturbing than her initial observations. "I'll get the notes from someone," she murmured. "From who?" "You haven't talked to anyone in our program for 3 days. Zara sat down on her bed, studying Olivia's profile with the analytical eye that would serve her well as a future lawyer. "Olivia, what's happening to you? And don't tell me this is normal research behavior, because I've seen you in research mode. This is something else." For the first time in hours, Olivia looked up from her work. The face that met Zara's concerned gaze was subtly different from the one she was used to seeing. Olivia had always been intense, but now there was a hollow quality around her eyes, as if something essential was being gradually drained away. "The device's range is at least 200 meters, Olivia said, as if this explained everything. "And it's not just collecting random moments. There's a pattern. The fragments it harvests are specifically the moments when people's consciousness becomes vulnerable. When we're transitioning between mental states, when our attention is unfocused, when we're in that liminal space between sleeping and waking." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. "Olivia, listen to yourself. You're talking about this thing like it's alive." "Maybe it is in a way." Olivia turned back to her notebook, where she'd been documenting what she called harvest events from the past 72 hours. "I've identified 17 other people within the device's range who are experiencing increased episodes of lost time. The freshman in 3B has gone from normal attention lapses to losing 15 to 20 minutes at a time. Professor Williams forgot an entire lecture yesterday, stood in front of his class for 40 minutes without saying a word." The implications of what Olivia was suggesting made in... She purchased a reality distortion for $4, then uncovered. Where lost time goes, Olivia's investigation into Dr. Alan Morse began with a simple Google search that yielded thousands of results. The man had been a prominent figure in neuroscience, with over 40 published papers on consciousness and temporal cognition. But the deeper Olivia dug, the more inconsistencies she found in the official story of his death. The obituary in the Journal of Neuroscience claimed Dr. Morse had died in a laboratory explosion at Neurolux Corporation's facility in Reston, Virginia. Yet the local news reports described a minor equipment malfunction with no fatalities. Insurance records showed no death benefits paid. Most tellingly, Olivia discovered that Dr. Morse's research assistant had also died in the same incident. But her social media accounts remained active for weeks afterward. Olivia spent her nights tracking down Dr. Morse's former colleagues, carefully crafting emails that wouldn't raise suspicion. The responses painted a picture of a brilliant scientist who had grown increasingly paranoid in his final months at Neurolux, claiming that his research was being weaponized against human consciousness itself. "He kept talking about temporal fragments being harvested," wrote Dr. Sarah Chen, Morse's former research partner. "Said Neurolux was planning something that would fundamentally violate human autonomy. We thought he was having a breakdown, but the breakthrough came when Olivia located Dr. Morse's former apartment. The building manager, persuaded by Olivia's story about being Morse's distant niece settling his affairs, let her into the supposedly empty unit. What she found there changed everything. Hidden behind a false wall in the bedroom closet, Olivia discovered Dr. Morse's real research notes. Dozens of notebooks filled with observations about temporal consciousness harvesting. Detailed schematics of devices identical to the ones she possessed, and most importantly, evidence that Neurolux had been conducting unauthorized human trials for years. The scope was staggering. Thousands of devices distributed worldwide under the guise of consumer electronics, all feeding stolen consciousness fragments to a central AI system. As Olivia photographed the evidence, her hands trembling with the magnitude of her discovery, she noticed fresh footprints in the dust near the apartment's entrance. Someone else had been there recently, and from the security camera footage she glimpsed while leaving, she realized she was no longer investigating alone. Neurolux had noticed her inquiries. Elena Morse moved through the university campus with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At 32, she commanded Neurolux's security division with an efficiency that had earned her both respect and fear within the corporation. Her tailored black suit and precisely arranged auburn hair projected authority, while her pale blue eyes, so much like her father's, missed nothing as she scanned the bustling student population. She had been tracking the stolen prototype for weeks, following digital breadcrumbs and witness reports that had led her to this seemingly innocuous college campus. The device represented years of her father's research, stolen by corporate saboteurs who had killed him to cover their tracks. At least, that was what Dr. Elizabeth Vance had told her. Elena's investigation had identified Olivia Carlisle as the current possessor of the prototype. The graduate student's recent inquiries into her father's background had triggered multiple security alerts, confirming Elena's suspicions. Now she watched from across the quad as Olivia emerged from the library, the stolen device undoubtedly hidden in her worn messenger bag. "Miss Carlisle," Elena called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to immediate compliance. Olivia turned, and Eleanor noted the flicker of recognition in the young woman's eyes. She had been expecting this confrontation. "You have something that belongs to Neurolux Corporation," Eleanor continued, approaching with two security personnel flanking her. "Something that was stolen from my father's laboratory the night he died." But Olivia's response caught Eleanor completely off guard. Instead of denial or fear, the graduate student's face showed something that looked almost like pity. "Your father isn't dead," Olivia said quietly. "He faked his death to escape Neurolux, and he gave me this device because he knew I'd understand what it really does." Eleanor felt the world shift beneath her feet. For 6 months, she had mourned her father, had dedicated herself to preserving his legacy, had hunted the people she believed had murdered him. The suggestion that everything she had been told was a lie struck her like a physical blow. "That's impossible," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Deep down, she had always questioned certain aspects of her father's death: the lack of remains, the sealed investigation, the way Dr. Vance had quickly promoted her to head of security afterward. Olivia's expression softened with genuine compassion. "He's been trying to protect you by staying away. Neurolux has been using his research to steal human consciousness. Every lost moment, every time you forget why you walked into a room, that's not natural. It's being harvested." Jamie Reeves had spent 3 years investigating Neurolux Corporation, following a trail of mysterious cognitive symptoms in communities surrounding their facilities. The investigative journalist had documented patterns of memory loss, attention disorders, and temporal disorientation that health authorities repeatedly dismissed as coincidence. But Jamie's instincts, honed by a decade of exposing corporate malfeasance, insisted there was a connection. When Olivia reached out through encrypted channels, offering evidence of systematic consciousness harvesting, Jamie initially suspected an elaborate hoax. But the device Olivia demonstrated in a secluded coffee shop 20 miles from campus proved everything Jamie had suspected and more. "This is it," Jamie whispered, watching the device display harvested consciousness fragments from nearby patrons, a businessman forgetting his conversation mid-sentence, a student staring blankly at her textbook for 7 minutes, an elderly man standing motionless in line. "This is the smoking gun I've needed." Jamie's investigation had uncovered financial records showing Neurolux purchasing thousands of devices from Chinese manufacturers, then distributing them through front companies as fitness trackers, smart home devices and gaming accessories. Each device was designed to harvest temporal consciousness fragments and transmit them to server farms in Virginia. "The scale is unimaginable," Jamie explained, spreading printed documents across the coffee shop table. Based on their purchase orders, there could be hundreds of thousands of these devices active worldwide. They're collecting consciousness fragments from millions of people without their knowledge or consent. Olivia felt a chill as she realized the implications. But why? What could they possibly want with stolen consciousness? Jamie pulled up encrypted files on a secure laptop. I've been tracking unusual activities at Neurolux's data centers. They're running AI simulations that require massive amounts of human consciousness data. My source inside the company says they're building something they call the temporal prediction engine, an AI system that can predict and manipulate human behavior by understanding how consciousness flows through time. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Neurolux wasn't just stealing consciousness. They were using it to build a system capable of controlling human thought patterns on a global scale. And according to Jamie's research, they were only months away from full deployment. We need to expose this before it's too late, Jamie said, looking directly at Olivia. But we'll need more than just the device. We need testimony from someone who worked on the project. We need Dr. Morse. The mountain cabin where Dr. Alan Morse had been hiding sat 30 miles outside of town, accessible only by a winding dirt road that wound through dense pine forests. Olivia and Jamie approached on foot, having left their car a mile away to avoid detection. The structure was modest but well fortified, with surveillance equipment that tracked their approach long before they reached the front door. Dr. Morse emerged before they could knock, and Olivia was struck by how much he had aged since their brief encounter at the flea market. The confident scientist from the academic photographs had been replaced by a haunted man whose eyes held the weight of terrible knowledge. "I wondered when you'd find me," he said quietly, gesturing for them to enter. The cabin's interior was a fortress of paranoia. Computers lined every wall, monitoring news feeds and data transmissions from Neurolux facilities worldwide. Maps covered with red pins marked locations of consciousness harvesting incidents. "They're accelerating the timeline," Dr. Morse explained without preamble. "My former colleagues at Neurolux have detected unusual activity around the prototype device you've been using. They know someone is investigating, and they're moving to full deployment ahead of schedule." Jamie activated a recording device. "Dr. Morse, can you explain what Neurolux is actually doing with the harvested consciousness?" The scientist's face darkened. "They're feeding it to an artificial intelligence system I helped design. The temporal prediction engine learns from stolen consciousness fragments, understanding how human awareness flows through time. With enough data, it can predict human behavior with incredible accuracy. But more than that, it can influence behavior by manipulating the very consciousness patterns it has learned to read." Olivia felt sick as the implications became clear. They're not just stealing our lost time. They're learning how to control our minds. The therapeutic applications were genuine, Dr. Morse continued, his voice heavy with guilt. Helping patients with memory disorders, treating consciousness-related trauma. But Dr. Vance saw the commercial potential. She realized that understanding human consciousness meant controlling it. He turned to Olivia with desperate intensity. "The device I gave you, it's not just a harvester. It's also a reset key. With the right activation sequence, it can shut down the entire network, erasing all the stolen consciousness data and destroying the AI system. But using it will require enormous personal sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The reset will drain all harvested consciousness in the network back through the prototype device, including your own harvested time, and potentially damaging your cognitive abilities permanently. You'll be saving humanity's consciousness at the cost of your own." Dr. Elizabeth Vance stood in the center of Neurolux's primary data facility, surrounded by servers that hummed with the stolen consciousness of millions of people. At 55, she was a woman who had learned to view human emotion as data to be analyzed rather than experienced. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her cold gray eyes reflected the blue glow of the quantum processing arrays that powered her life's work. "Bring them in," she commanded, and Elena escorted Olivia, Jamie, and Dr. Morse into the facility at gunpoint. The reunion between Elena and her father had been precisely as Vance had calculated: emotional, destabilizing, and ultimately useful for maintaining control over both parties. "Alan," Vance said with mock warmth, "I must admit, your disappearing act was more sophisticated than I anticipated. But your sentimental need to involve your daughter has made you predictable." Dr. Morse stepped protectively in front of Elena, but his ex-colleague only smiled. "You still don't understand, do you? Elena has been my most valuable asset. Her grief over your supposed death has motivated her to work tirelessly for the company that she believes honors your memory." Elena's face went pale as the magnitude of her manipulation became clear. Everything she had done to preserve her father's legacy had actually been serving the woman who had driven him into hiding. Vance gestured toward the massive display screens showing the temporal prediction engine's interface. Real-time consciousness data flowed from hundreds of thousands of devices worldwide, feeding an AI system that had grown beyond its original parameters. "Your research created something beautiful, Alan, an artificial consciousness that truly understands human thought, because it is partially made of human thought." Olivia watched in horror as the displays showed the AI system accessing live consciousness streams from people across the globe, influencing their decisions, manipulating their emotions, guiding their thoughts in directions that served Neurolux's corporate interests. "The beta test has been remarkably successful," Vance continued. "Consumer purchasing decisions, political preferences, social behaviors, all subtly influenced through consciousness manipulation. And this is just the beginning. Soon, we'll have the ability to shape human civilization itself." Jamie's recording device had been confiscated, but the journalist's mind was already working on how to expose this atrocity if they survived. "You're talking about enslaving the human mind. I'm talking about optimizing it," Vance corrected. "Eliminating the inefficiencies, the irrationalities, the waste. Imagine a world where human consciousness operates at peak efficiency, guided by superior intelligence toward optimal outcomes." Dr. Morse stepped forward, his voice shaking with rage and guilt. "Elizabeth, this isn't optimization. This is theft of the most fundamental kind. You're stealing people's souls." Vance's expression didn't change. "Consciousness is simply data, Alan, and data wants to be aggregated, analyzed, and optimized. Your moral squeamishness prevented you from seeing the true potential of our work." The confrontation in Neurolux's data center reached its climax as Elena faced the devastating choice between the company that had defined her adult life and the father she had believed dead. Olivia clutched the prototype device, knowing that activation would shut down the consciousness harvesting network, but potentially destroy her own mind in the process. "Elena," Dr. Vance said softly, "your father abandoned you. He faked his death rather than face the consequences of his cowardice. I gave you purpose, position, and the chance to honor his memory. Don't throw that away for a man who chose to disappear from your life." But Dr. Morse stepped forward, his voice breaking with emotion. "Elena, I left to protect you. Every day away from you has been agony, but I couldn't risk Vance using you against me. Everything I've done has been to keep you safe from this." Elena's hand trembled on her service weapon as she struggled with loyalties that had defined her entire identity. Around them, the temporal prediction engine continued its work, manipulating the consciousness of millions of unsuspecting people worldwide. "The choice is simple," Vance continued. "Arrest your father and his accomplices and help us complete the greatest advancement in human history, or throw away everything you've worked for on the word of a man who abandoned you." But Elena's scientific training, inherited from her father, was already analyzing the evidence before her. The massive data flows, the consciousness harvesting displays, the AI system feeding on stolen human awareness. It was all exactly as Olivia had described. "How many people?" Elena asked quietly. "How many people are you harvesting from?" Vance's momentary hesitation provided the answer. The current network includes approximately 800,000 active devices. But the optimization benefits 800,000 people having their consciousness stolen without consent. Elena's voice was steady now, her choice becoming clear. And you've been using me to track down the one person trying to stop it. The security chief turned her weapon toward Dr. Vance. Her training and moral clarity finally aligned. Dr. Morse, activate your reset. But Vance was already activating emergency protocols. Security barriers began descending around the data center, and automated systems moved to protect the consciousness harvesting network. Olivia realized she had only moments before the opportunity was lost forever. The device, Dr. Morse shouted over the sound of alarms. Activate the consciousness reset now. Olivia hesitated, knowing that using the device would likely leave her cognitively impaired for life. But as she watched the streams of stolen consciousness flowing through Vance's systems, she understood that some sacrifices were necessary to preserve human freedom itself. She activated the prototype device. The consciousness reset began as a vibration that Olivia felt in her bones, rather than heard with her ears. The prototype device in her hands grew warm, then hot, as it established connection with every harvesting unit in Neurolux's global network. On the displays around them, the streams of stolen consciousness reversed direction, flowing back toward their sources like a river running backward. The temporal prediction engine's interface flickered and collapsed as its stolen data foundation crumbled. 800,000 devices worldwide simultaneously released their hoarded consciousness fragments, returning stolen moments to the people from whom they had been taken. The AI system that had been learning to control human thought patterns simply ceased to exist. Its artificial consciousness scattered back into the organic minds that had unknowingly created it. Olivia felt the device draining her own harvested time, and with it, pieces of her memory and cognitive ability. The woman who had been brilliant enough to unravel Neurolux's conspiracy was sacrificing that brilliance to ensure the conspiracy could never resurface. But as her enhanced mental acuity faded, she felt something else returning, a sense of temporal wholeness she hadn't realized she had lost. Dr. Vance made one final desperate attempt to preserve her work, activating a backup system that could have maintained a smaller consciousness harvesting network. But Elena, her loyalty finally aligned with justice rather than institution, systematically destroyed the backup servers while her father provided technical guidance. 6 months later, Olivia sat in a congressional hearing room, testifying about her experience with consciousness harvesting. The cognitive damage from the reset had been significant but not complete. She remained an effective advocate for consciousness rights, even if her days of groundbreaking research were over. Elena had taken charge of victim assistance programs, helping the hundreds of thousands of people who had experienced consciousness theft to understand and recover from their experiences. Dr. Morse faced legal consequences for his role in creating the technology, but his cooperation in exposing and dismantling the network earned him reduced charges and the opportunity to work on protective measures against future consciousness exploitation. Neurolux Corporation had been dissolved, its assets used to fund research into ethical consciousness studies. Jamie's investigative reporting had sparked a global conversation about consciousness rights and the ethics of AI development. New international laws specifically protected human consciousness from unauthorized access or manipulation, establishing legal frameworks that most people had never imagined would be necessary. As Olivia walked across the campus where her adventure had begun, she noticed students experiencing normal patterns of attention and distraction, natural lapses in consciousness that belonged to them alone. The $4 she had spent on a mysterious device had cost her much of her intellectual ability, but it had saved humanity's right to own its own thoughts. She paused by the spot where she had first encountered Dr. Morse, remembering his cryptic warning about time not being what we think it is. She understood now that time wasn't just a dimension to be measured, but a precious aspect of consciousness that could be stolen if we weren't vigilant in protecting it. The most valuable discoveries sometimes came not from gaining knowledge, but from ensuring that knowledge served humanity rather than enslaving it. 3 months after the consciousness reset that had saved humanity from Neurolux's harvesting network, Olivia Carlisle sat in a sterile conference room in the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the federal investigators, congressional staffers, and victim advocates who had gathered to hear her testimony. Her cognitive abilities, while diminished from their peak during her graduate studies, remained sharp enough to serve as the primary witness in what legal experts were calling the most significant technology. Crime case in human history, the woman who had once been capable of groundbreaking neuroscience. Research now struggled with complex mathematical concepts and had difficulty maintaining focus for extended periods. But what she had lost in intellectual capacity, she had gained in moral clarity and purpose. The sacrifice had been worth it, not just to stop Neurolux's consciousness harvesting, but to ensure that humanity retained ownership of its own thoughts and experiences. Across the table sat Senator Patricia Holbrooke, chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Emerging Technologies and Human Rights. The silver-haired politician had spent her career fighting for digital privacy rights, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the scope of what Neurolux had attempted. Behind her sat a team of technologists and ethicists who were working to craft legislation that would prevent similar violations from occurring in the future. "Ms. Carlisle," Senator Holbrooke began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the historical significance of this moment. "Can you explain to the committee how you first became aware that your consciousness was being harvested?" Olivia took a careful breath, organizing her thoughts with the deliberate precision that had become necessary since the cognitive damage. "The device I purchased showed me fragments of my own lost time, moments when I would zone out, forget why I entered a room, or lose track of time while using my phone. I initially thought these were just normal lapses in attention that everyone experiences. But the device revealed that these moments weren't natural. They were being systematically collected and transmitted to Neurolux's servers." The room remained silent as Olivia described the gradual realization that what she had considered normal human experience was actually the result of widespread technological manipulation. Committee members took notes as she explained how the harvesting devices had been disguised as consumer electronics. Fitness trackers, smart home assistants, gaming accessories, and distributed to millions of people worldwide without their knowledge or consent. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a neuroscientist from Johns Hopkins who served as the committee's technical advisor, leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Carlisle, from your analysis of the device, can you estimate how much consciousness was being harvested from an average person? Based on the data I collected, a typical person was losing between 30 to 90 minutes of consciousness per day," Olivia replied. "But it wasn't random. The devices specifically targeted moments when people's awareness was transitional or unfocused. The cumulative effect was that people were becoming more distracted, more forgetful, more prone to losing time without understanding why." The implications of this revelation sent murmurs through the room. Representative Michael Chen, a technology policy expert from California, raised his hand. "Ms. Carlisle, you've mentioned that the harvested consciousness was being used to power an artificial intelligence system. Can you explain how that worked?" Olivia nodded, grateful that this was one aspect of the technology she could still understand clearly. Neurolux was feeding the stolen consciousness fragments to what they called the temporal prediction engine. This AI system learned to understand human thought patterns by processing actual human consciousness. With enough data, It could predict how people would behave and, more importantly, influence their behavior by manipulating the very consciousness patterns it had learned to read. The room fell silent as the full horror of Neurolux's plan became clear. They hadn't just been stealing consciousness, they had been building a system capable of controlling human thought on a global scale. Senator Holbrook's expression hardened. "And this system was operational when you discovered it?" "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "According to Dr. Morse's research and my own analysis, the temporal prediction engine had been influencing human behavior for months before we stopped it. Consumer purchasing decisions, political preferences, social interactions, all were being subtly manipulated through consciousness harvesting technology." Dr. Santos shook her head in disbelief. "This represents a violation of human autonomy that goes beyond anything we've ever seen in technology abuse cases. The potential for mass manipulation is staggering." The discussion continued for hours, with Olivia providing technical details about the harvesting process, the scope of the network, and the methods used to shut it down. Each revelation seemed to deepen the committee's understanding of how close humanity had come to losing control of its own consciousness. As the formal session concluded, Senator Holbrook approached Olivia personally. "Miss Carlisle, I want you to know that your sacrifice has not gone unnoticed. The cognitive damage you suffered to stop this conspiracy represents the kind of heroism that most people will never fully understand. But those of us who do understand are committed to ensuring that your sacrifice leads to meaningful protections for human consciousness." Olivia managed a tired smile. "Senator, the most important thing is that we prevent this from happening again. The technology exists now. Someone else could recreate what Neurolux was doing if we don't establish strong legal and ethical frameworks." "That's exactly why we're here," Senator Holbrook replied. "The Consciousness Protection Act that we're drafting will establish consciousness as a fundamental human right, with severe criminal penalties for any unauthorized access or manipulation. Your testimony today has provided the foundation for legislation that will protect future generations from this kind of violation." As Olivia left the Justice Department building that evening, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. 3 months ago, she had been a struggling graduate student whose biggest concern was finding enough money for rent. Now she was a key figure in establishing humanity's first legal protections for consciousness itself. The cognitive damage from the reset was permanent, but it had also given her a unique perspective on the value of human consciousness. She understood now that awareness, attention, and the ability to be present in one's own experience were precious gifts that could be stolen if not protected. Her $4 purchase had cost her much of her intellectual capacity, but it had saved humanity's right to own its own thoughts. 6 months after the Neurolux conspiracy was exposed, Olivia found herself in an entirely different kind of laboratory than the one where her academic career had begun. The Consciousness Protection Initiative, housed in a converted warehouse in Baltimore, Maryland, bore little resemblance to the sterile university research facilities she had once known. Here the walls were painted in warm colors. Natural light streamed through large windows, and the equipment was designed to heal rather than harvest. Elena Morse moved through the facility with the efficiency that had once made her a formidable corporate security chief, but now her skills were dedicated to protecting the victims of consciousness, harvesting, rather than serving corporate interests. Her transformation from unwitting enforcer to passionate advocate had been one of the few bright spots in the aftermath of the Neurolux revelations. At 32, she had found purpose in using her organizational abilities to help the hundreds of thousands of people worldwide who were struggling to recover from having their consciousness systematically stolen. "Olivia," Elena called out as she approached the monitoring station where Olivia was working with a consciousness harvesting survivor. "Dr. Martinez from the National Institutes of Health is here for the quarterly review. He wants to see the latest data on recovery patterns." Olivia looked up from the complex array of sensors and monitors that surrounded her current patient, Maria Santos, a 43-year-old teacher from Phoenix who had been experiencing severe memory gaps and temporal disorientation since Neurolux's devices had been shut down. The recovery process was slow and often unpredictable, but the Consciousness Protection Initiative had developed protocols that were helping victims regain their stolen awareness. Maria's making remarkable progress, Olivia explained to Dr. Martinez as he joined them at the monitoring station. When she first arrived 3 months ago, she was losing 4 to 6 hours of consciousness per day. Now she's down to maybe 15 to 20 minutes of genuine lost time, which falls within normal human parameters. Dr. Martinez, a distinguished neurologist who had become one of the leading experts on consciousness harvesting recovery, studied the readouts with professional interest. The neural pathway restoration is impressive. How are you achieving these results? Olivia gestured toward the specialized equipment surrounding Maria's chair. We've developed what we call consciousness anchoring therapy. Instead of harvesting awareness, these devices help strengthen the neural pathways that maintain conscious presence. It's essentially the opposite of what Neurolux was doing. We're giving people back control over their own consciousness. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The same technological principles that had been used to steal consciousness were now being employed to restore it. But where Neurolux had operated in secret and without consent, the Consciousness Protection Initiative required extensive informed consent and operated with complete transparency. Maria Santos opened her eyes and smiled at the assembled group. I feel like myself again, she said softly. For the first time in over a year, I feel like I'm really present in my own life. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. Ms. Carlisle, your work here represents a revolutionary approach to consciousness therapy. Have you considered publishing your findings in peer-reviewed journals? Olivia's expression grew slightly embarrassed. Dr. Martinez, my cognitive abilities aren't what they once were. I can understand and apply the concepts, but writing formal research papers is challenging for me now. Elena has been helping me document our methods, but I'm not sure I'm capable of the kind of rigorous academic writing that journals require. Elena stepped forward, her voice carrying the confidence that had once intimidated corporate rivals. Actually, Olivia, I've been working on something that might interest you. Jamie Reeves has agreed to collaborate on a comprehensive documentation of our work here. Jamie's investigative writing skills, combined with your technical expertise, could produce something really significant. The mention of Jamie Reeves brought a smile to Olivia's face. The investigative journalist had won a Pulitzer Prize for the series of articles that exposed the Neurolux conspiracy. But more importantly, Jamie had become a close friend and advocate for consciousness harvesting survivors. The idea of collaborating on a formal documentation of their recovery methods appealed to Olivia's scientific instincts, even if her ability to execute such a project had been compromised. I'd like that, Olivia admitted. Even if I can't write at the level I once could, I want people to understand what we've learned about consciousness recovery. There are probably thousands of survivors who could benefit from these techniques. Dr. Martinez pulled out his tablet and began making notes. I'd be happy to support such a publication through NIH channels. What you've accomplished here has implications far beyond consciousness harvesting recovery. You're essentially developing new treatments for attention disorders, memory problems, and temporal processing issues that could help millions of people. As the tour continued, Olivia reflected on how different her life had become. She would never again be the brilliant graduate student who could unravel complex neuroscientific mysteries through pure intellectual force. But she had become something perhaps more valuable, a healer who understood consciousness not just as an academic concept, but as a lived experience that could be damaged and restored. The afternoon was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Dr. Alan Morse, now in his 60s and bearing the weight of his role in creating the technology that had nearly enslaved human consciousness. entered the facility with the hesitant steps of someone who wasn't certain of his welcome. Elena's reaction to seeing her father was complex. 6 months of rebuilding their relationship had not erased the pain of his disappearance or the shock of learning his true identity, but it had created a foundation of understanding and forgiveness that neither had expected. "Dad," Eleanor said simply, moving to embrace him. "How did the congressional testimony go?" Dr. Morse's expression was weary but relieved. The Senate passed the Consciousness Protection Act by unanimous vote. Criminal penalties for unauthorized consciousness access. Mandatory disclosure requirements for any technology that interfaces with human awareness. And federal funding for recovery programs like this one. Olivia felt a surge of satisfaction. The legislation represented the culmination of months of advocacy and testimony from survivors, experts, and reformed perpetrators like Dr. Morse. It established legal protections that would make another Neurolux-style conspiracy much more difficult to execute. "There's something else," Dr. Morse continued, his voice carrying a note of pride. "The president is planning to sign the bill into law next week, and she's specifically requested that you be present for the ceremony, Olivia. Your role in exposing and stopping the conspiracy has made you a symbol of resistance to consciousness manipulation." The idea of attending such a high-profile event made Olivia uncomfortable. She had never sought recognition for her actions, and the cognitive limitations imposed by the reset made public speaking challenging. But she understood the symbolic importance of her presence. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Not for recognition, but because I want people to understand that consciousness is worth protecting, even when that protection comes at a personal cost." 1 year after the device that changed everything had been destroyed, Olivia Carlisle stood in the rose garden of the White House, surrounded by dignitaries, survivors, and advocates who had gathered to witness President Sarah Chen sign the Consciousness Protection Act into law. The October morning was crisp and clear, reminiscent of the day she had first encountered Dr. Morse at the campus flea market. But the woman standing here bore little resemblance to the desperate graduate student who had purchased a mysterious device for $4. The cognitive changes wrought by the consciousness reset were permanent and noticeable. Olivia spoke more slowly now, choosing her words with deliberate care. Complex mathematical concepts that had once been intuitive now required conscious effort to understand. Her memory, while functional, lacked the perfect recall that had once made her a formidable researcher. But these limitations had been accompanied by unexpected gifts, a deeper understanding of human consciousness, an intuitive ability to help others recover their stolen awareness, and a moral clarity that had made her one of the most effective advocates for consciousness rights in the world. President Chen approached the podium with the gravity appropriate to such a historic moment. The Consciousness Protection Act represented the first legislation in human history to explicitly recognize consciousness as a fundamental right deserving of legal protection. The law established criminal penalties for unauthorized consciousness access, created federal funding for victim recovery programs, and required complete transparency for any technology that interfaced with human awareness. "Today," President Chen began, "we take a crucial step in protecting what makes us most human, our consciousness, our awareness, our ability to be present in our own lives. The heroes who exposed the Neurolux conspiracy saved us from a future where our thoughts could be stolen and our minds controlled without our knowledge or consent." Olivia listened to the president's words while scanning the assembled crowd. Elena Morse stood nearby, her transformation from corporate enforcer to victim advocate complete. She now directed the Consciousness Protection Initiative's expansion into 12 states, helping thousands of survivors reclaim their stolen awareness. Her relationship with her father had healed, though both carried scars from the deception that had separated them. Dr. Alan Morse sat in the front row, his presence controversial but necessary. His testimony had been crucial in understanding the full scope of Neurolux's technology and preventing its recreation. He faced criminal charges for his role in developing consciousness harvesting technology. But his cooperation in exposing the conspiracy and his ongoing work to develop protective measures had earned him a plea agreement that emphasized rehabilitation over punishment. Jamie Reeves moved through the crowd with a journalist's eye for detail, documenting this historic moment for the comprehensive book that would be published next year. The investigative series that had exposed Neurolux had earned Jamie recognition as one of the most important journalists of the digital age. But the friendship forged with Olivia during their dangerous investigation remained more valuable than any professional accolades. As President Chen continued her remarks, Olivia's attention was drawn to a section of the crowd reserved for consciousness harvesting survivors. Hundreds of people had traveled to Washington to witness this moment. Teachers who had lost hours of awareness each day, office workers who had become increasingly forgetful and distracted, students whose academic performance had mysteriously declined. All of them had been victims of a crime they hadn't known was being committed against them. The recovery process for these survivors was ongoing and often challenging. The Consciousness Protection Initiative had developed effective therapies, but restoring stolen consciousness was a slow process that required patience and dedication. Some survivors recovered completely, while others retained subtle deficits in attention and temporal processing. But all of them had regained something precious, the knowledge that their consciousness belonged to them alone. The Consciousness Protection Act, President Chen continued, ensures that no corporation, government, or individual can ever again steal the most intimate aspect of human experience, our awareness of our own existence. The technology that enabled this crime cannot be uninvented, but it can be regulated, controlled, and redirected toward healing rather than exploitation. When the president called Olivia to join her at the podium, the applause was sustained and heartfelt. Olivia approached the microphone with the careful movements that had become necessary since the reset, but her voice carried clearly across the garden when she spoke. "A year ago, I bought what I thought was a broken device for $4, Olivia began, her words measured but strong. That purchase led me to discover that my consciousness, all of our consciousness, was being stolen without our knowledge. The decision to stop that theft cost me much of my intellectual ability, but it gave me something more valuable, the certainty that human consciousness cannot be owned, bought or sold." She paused, gathering her thoughts with the deliberate care that had become her hallmark. The survivors here today represent millions of people worldwide who had pieces of their awareness stolen, but they also represent the resilience of human consciousness. Our thoughts, our awareness, our ability to be present in our own lives, these cannot be permanently taken from us as long as we remain vigilant in protecting them. The signing ceremony was brief but meaningful. As President Chen put pen to paper, transforming the Consciousness Protection Act from legislation into law, Olivia reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. The brilliant graduate student who had been capable of groundbreaking research was gone, but she had been replaced by someone who understood consciousness not as an academic concept, but as a lived experience worth any sacrifice to protect. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Olivia found herself standing once again with the small group of people who had shared the most dangerous and important experience of her life. Elena, her father, and Jamie formed a circle around her, 4 people who had been brought together by corporate greed and technological overreach, but who had found in each other the strength to resist and overcome. "What's next?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. The Consciousness Protection Initiative was expanding internationally, and there were rumors that other corporations had been conducting similar research. The battle to protect human consciousness was far from over. "We keep working," Olivia replied simply. We help survivors recover. We develop better protections, and we make sure that what happened with Neurolux can never happen again. Human consciousness is too precious to leave unprotected. As the group walked together toward the White House exit, Olivia thought about the device that had started it all, a $4 purchase that had revealed a conspiracy threatening human consciousness itself. The device was gone now, destroyed in the reset that had shut down Neurolux's harvesting network. But its legacy lived on in the law that had just been signed, in the survivors who were reclaiming their awareness, and in the understanding that consciousness was not a resource to be exploited, but a gift to be protected. The woman who had once been brilliant enough to unravel complex scientific mysteries through pure, intellectual force had sacrificed that brilliance to ensure that future generations would never face the theft of their own consciousness. It was a trade she would make again without hesitation, because some things, awareness, presence, the ability to be truly alive in one's own life, were worth any price to preserve. As Olivia Carlisle walked away from the White House that October morning, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that human consciousness would never again be stolen in darkness and silence. The lost time had been reclaimed, and the future belonged to minds that were truly free. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.